I always tell investors, I say, what are you trying to accomplish with your money? What do you want your money to do for you? Younger investors, again, it depends on where they are in life, but most of them, you really want capital accumulation. You want to increase the amount of capital that you have. And if you don't need cash flow because you're both working, great.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on things that grow over time, that are tax advantaged, and that are inflation resistant. What is it you as the investor are trying to achieve? I strongly encourage people to write down their goals.
Yeah.
What are you trying to accomplish? I mean, you don't have to have 40 pages of spreadsheets and PERT charts and all this other stuff. I said, just, what do you need to be comfortable?
You're listening to the Accredited Investors Only podcast, presented by Accredited Life.
Shawn, welcome to the show. How you feeling today?
I'm doing awesome, Peter. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm really looking forward to talking to your audience today.
Oh, same here. I appreciate you being here. And as we were saying before I hit record, I always like to start with the person introducing themselves. So, Shawn, who are you? What are you doing? All that kind of stuff.
Oh, man, that's a loaded question. I could probably talk about that for well over an hour, but to keep it short, I'm Shawn Griffith. I'm the VP of Treasury and Finance with Craft Capital Investments. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I got started in the investing business, well, as a limited partner on a deal. Because I don't like the term passive investor. We can talk about that some more later too. Probably, I don't know, about 13 years ago, a friend of mine invited me to one of these real estate meetup things on the weekend, and they were talking about single family and how you get 10 single family homes and you can have, replace your W-2 income. And then the next day they talked about multifamily. Well, I'm a math guy, I'm math and computer science. And so that economy of scale immediately made sense to me. And I wasn't ready to take the plunge as an operator at that point, but I invested with my friend that went, because he's a serial entrepreneur. He's had dozens of businesses over the years, some of them wildly successful, some of them wildly painful. But whatever he goes into 120%. And I still to this day blame him for my real estate addiction, because that first deal, we got like 3.5 times our original capital back. It cash flowed like 12 to 14%. Wow. I'm still looking for a deal that good. And I'm still invested in a deal with him that we bought back in 2016. It's up for sale right now. And it's probably going to be about a 2.5 to 3Xer once it's all said and done.
Nice. Well, what were you doing before you caught the real estate bug? You said you're a math guy.
Yeah. So if you wind all the way back to high school, I was born up in East Tennessee, up in the mountains. I'm one of those people. I'm a little bit obstinate when they have you fill out forms that say ethnicity. I like to write in other and Appalachian American. And if you've ever been up in that area of the country, you'll understand. But so I went in the Navy right out of high school on the delayed entry program. I also applied for a scholarship. And I know you'll be utterly shocked to know that the government screwed up the paperwork on the scholarship. So by the time they figured out I actually had a scholarship, I had already been through boot camp, basic electricity and electronics school, and was wrapping up my electronics school phase 1, and was getting ready to go back down to Orlando for nuclear power school.
Wow.
They ended up discharging me from active duty to inactive reserve. I did 4 years in college at Vanderbilt and Belmont University. At the time, it was Belmont College. And then was commissioned, went out to Hawaii, tough duty, but somebody had to do it. I was on an old tin can. It was a guided missile destroyer. We did a couple of Westpac deployments. So I've been pretty much I've been all the way around the world, halfway one way, halfway the other way, courtesy of the U.S. Navy.
Wow.
On various and sundry trainings and things that we've done.
Mm-hmm.
Got out of the Navy, went to work for Texas Instruments. Worked for them for 9.5 years until they sold their defense group to Raytheon. Worked for Raytheon for about a year and a half until Raytheon packed up and moved out of Dallas, or at least the missile systems. I didn't want to move to Tucson because I didn't want to live in the desert, and I couldn't afford to move to Andover, Massachusetts. And it's a beautiful area, and I've got friends that live up there. I'm just going like, they didn't want to give us raises to move up there. And I'm going, okay, here I am moving from a state with no state income tax and a low cost of living to a place that's affectionately known as Taxachusetts. And I'm going, yeah, not going to work. Math just doesn't do it for me. So I ended up doing what I referred to as some creative unemployment. I bounced around town doing different consulting jobs. Some of it I referred to as access database babysitting. Like some small companies had somebody build an access database application and they didn't have anybody to take care of it in-house. So I'd come in and fix stuff for them. Ended up doing a consulting gig with Southwest Airlines. They liked me, hired me. I worked for them for 14 years until I retired. Went back east to help take care of my dad for a couple of years, doing some contract work there. And then after dad passed away and my contracts were up, I told the contracting company, hey, my wife and I will move anywhere in the country, just find us jobs. And literally the next morning they called me and said, hey, we got this gig in Dallas we think you'd be perfect for. And I go, yeah, who's it with? Southwest Airlines. I could work for them. They go, yeah, we figured you might. So I did a contract job for them for, I don't know, a year and a half or so, bounced around town doing contract jobs for a while. During that time, I really got involved in real estate investing, and started getting some exposure to some of the other alternate asset classes like oil and gas.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's, you got a highly abbreviated version of me and my investing history there.
Sure, I'm sure there's a lot of experience there, and I want to get back to it in a minute. But I'm curious, to now kind of let's do that on the opposite end. So you said you went to that, meeting with your buddy there, and that brought you into like the LP side of the business. What's that story look like, and how have you transitioned now to what you're doing today?
No, that's great. I always tell my investors, I said, look, I don't care what you're investing in. If it's, multifamily, oil and gas, a stock market, your kid's lemonade stand, you better know the answer to two fundamental questions. One of them is, how does this thing make me money? And the other one is, how can this thing lose me my money? I said, at the minimum, whatever it is you're investing in, you better know those two, the answer to those two. If you don't, you need to go back and do some more homework.
Yeah.
And that's why, we were talking earlier when we got started about, one of my hot buttons is the term passive investor. I really don't like using that term because you as an investor should never be passive. You got a whole bunch of homework you need to do before you write me a nice big check. And, or anybody for that matter, you need to understand who it is that you're dealing with, what the investment is, how that investment makes you money. Now, you don't need to be an expert. You don't need, like if you're investing in oil and gas, you don't need to know how to go out and cap a well. You don't need to go, you don't need to know how to deal with roughnecks. There's a whole lot of stuff you don't need to know, but what you need to understand is kind of the financial operation of the business, right?
Sure.
And, maybe some fundamental, like if you're going to invest in oil and gas, understanding some of the underlying, geography and geologic studies and things that go on. You don't need to be able to read some of those crazy graphs and stuff that they like to put in the decks. But what you do need to know is you need to know enough about it to ask questions about the people that know that stuff.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And it's a balancing act, right? I mean, I've got some investors that get way into apartment operations more than they ever really need to, which is okay. I mean, we don't mind tough questions. That's one of the things that Craft Capital prides herself on is our transparency. We don't just talk about it. There's a lot of people out there go, oh yeah, we're transparent. Well, we share everything with our investors, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Bad news doesn't get better with age, so if we have something that comes up, we try to let everybody know just as soon as we find out.
That's a really good point. Bad news doesn't get better with age. I love that. That's Very true, and typically the more you're on top of something, and there's no surprises or anything like that. I mean, people certainly appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about like your transition, because you said that first you invested in a multifamily property, and then I'm sure you kind of learned as on the LP side of the business. When did you get over to the operation side, and then where did like oil and gas and other styles of investments and asset classes and things like that, when do they come into the play?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'll start with how I moved from LP into operations. We invested in several LP deals over the years. I think we're invested in about, I don't know, 15 or so right now. And I guess it was November of 2020. My wife and I were sitting around the kitchen table talking about our finances and what retirement was going to look like. And we came to the realization that the bill of goods that Wall Street and corporate America had sold us wasn't quite all it was cracked up to be. I mean, don't get me wrong. We had money in a 401k and we'd had an okay retirement, but who wants okay, right? And so we said, what are some ways we can do to grow our retirement and have, longer term income throughout our retirement? And we looked at several different things. And for us, the multifamily real estate made sense because, we knew we knew the industry. We found a coach and mentor. We looked at several, and I always recommend, people. I mean, I will recommend my mentor if people call me and ask me and want to talk about it. And I'm happy to do that. But at the same time, I will tell them my mentor may not be the right person for you. I said, you need to find somebody that kind of clicks with your learning style and, your, I guess there's too many words in the English language, your coachability. Some people need to be beaten with a stick to be coached. And some people you can just have a conversation with them.
Sure.
And some people you just kind of have to make subtle suggestions. I mean, it just depends, right? So you got to find a mentor that you connect with. And I tell them, I say, look, go out there and research, real estate mentors if you want to get involved in real estate. I said, there's dozens of them out there. The good ones all have some free or very inexpensive material that you can try out to go, okay, I kind of like the way this person does things. And then you can decide then if you want to, spend a buttload of money on them. Because most of them are expensive if you get their, full coaching program.
So did you have like a specific goal in mind? I'm assuming when you signed up with the mentor and kind of made that decision that the retirement that you wanted and your family wanted and all, what did it look like? Did you have like a kind of an image in your mind? What, and kind of paint the picture of these apartments and all, were they 10 unit buildings, 50 unit, 200 unit? And did you have management in place? Were you doing everything? I'm curious, like how much you knew at the time you started, and then I'm curious to like, did that stay? Where what you said at the kitchen table that night, or did things evolve over time as you got more active in the coaching side of it, and then obviously from the coaching to actually doing the operations and finding deals and things like that?
Yeah, no, that's great. Peter, I think when I got started, there was a lot of enthusiasm.
Always, right?
Anytime you start a new venture, right, there's a lot of enthusiasm. But my wife and I made the commitment. We said that, if we're going to do this and we're going to spend this amount of money on coaching, then we're going to commit to it and go all in. So we committed because at the time, both of us were still working our W-2 jobs.
Okay.
And we committed to 2 hours a night that we were going to, watch videos, study, practice underwriting, have calls with the coaches, start having calls with potential investors, doing all of, going to meetups, attending industry events, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? There's a never ending process of learning involved in running a business, whether it's real estate and multifamily apartments, or any other business. They all require some amount of work, and you need to stay current on the economics and the industry trends that affect your business. And that's all part of it. But when we got started, it was I literally felt like I was spinning my wheels for the first 6 months. And when I look back on it now, I realize what I was doing was, you can imagine a big flywheel, right? It's really hard to get it moving. It's slowly, because you're putting a lot of effort into it just to get it started. And after about 6 months, I really felt like things were starting to pick up a little bit, and I was seeing some deal flow, and I found a deal. I put together a team, and we bought our first property, which was 86 units down in Cleburne, Texas. We had professional management. Now, could I have done that by myself? Maybe.
How close was that to the house?
It's anywhere from an hour to an hour and 20 minutes, depending on traffic.
Well, that's not bad.
No. And to date, that's been my best performing property, because we got like a 3.89% loan on it. People would kill for that right now.
So is that something you want to hold for the long term, or?
Well, so the way our mentor teaches, the basic business plan is a 5-year hold. You buy it, you fix it up, you operate it, and then you sell it. Now, my neighbor down the street, who's been in real estate for 30 plus years, we were talking one day in his driveway, and I said, "So, Alan," I said, have you ever, in all the deals that you've done, have you ever seen a real estate deal go exactly as you planned? And he just started laughing. He goes, "Never." So, that being said, that's one of the reasons we always have multiple exit plans going into a deal, because you just don't know what's going to happen. We are prepared to hold it. I would love to hold it because it's still cash flowing and doing distributions to our investors. I have some other partners in the deal. They may want their money back. I mean, I would love getting my money back out of it and reinvest it into some other stuff. But, we've got a certain target that we have to hit for our investors before we do that. And then there's always the option, somebody from California may come in with a ridiculous amount of money and say, "Hey, I want to buy your apartment." And I'm going to look at it and go, "Yeah, let's do it." My property management team on site, I've actually talked to their owner. They like the property. They might consider buying it. So I've got a lot of different options. We can either hold on to it. We could potentially do a cash out refi. It's a 10-year loan. So, it's
time to think about it. Yeah.
So that was another bonus. I actually had a broker's opinion of value done on the property last November, and it's one of the broker called me up when he got done. He goes, "This is one of the few properties I've looked at that actually I was able to come up with a sale price for more than you paid for it." Because he goes, "So many people right now are underwater because of their debt." He goes, "You're ahead of the game because of your debt. We bought it right." I had one of the partners that said, "Oh, let's," or some of my friends that were in the industry were telling me, "Oh yeah, you want to go with floating rate debt? It's cheaper." He goes, and the rates are never going to go back up. And I'm going, you know what? I mean, this is my first property, and the numbers work with fixed rate debt. And since it's my first property and I can fix a cost going forward and the numbers work, I think I'm going to do that. Because I said that reduces my risk and my investors' risk. And they go, "Well, okay." And now I look like
you were proven right there. Yeah, exactly.
I look like a genius, and I'm going, I'm not a genius. I'm just cautious,
Yeah.
And that's the thing, getting into investing, it's a balance between being able to step out and take that risk, because I don't care what you're investing in. If you plan to get a return on your money for no effort on your part, there is risk involved. Now, you as the investor need to figure out, am I comfortable with that amount of risk? Well, I guess the first question is, do I even understand what the risks are? It kind of goes back to the other two questions. I said, how does this thing make me money and how can it lose me my money? The things that can lose you your money is a very long list. And if you actually read a PPM, there's about 14 or 15 pages in there of all things of why you should not invest in this deal.
Sure.
I had an SEC attorney tell me one time, matter of fact, it's the first one that I ever had reviewed. He goes, the only reason these 14 or 15 pages should scare you is if they're missing.
Yeah.
Because then they're trying to hide something. He goes, what those 14 or 15 pages should do is to go, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Sponsor of this deal, how are you going to mitigate all of these 14 or 15 pages of things in here?
Sure.
They fall into two basic categories. About 80% of them is mitigated by having the right type and amount of insurance. The other 20 or so percent is doing a very thorough physical due diligence on the property before you take it over.
Yeah. That's a really good point, and I think I hear at least, I don't maybe not once a week, but a couple times a month, an investor look at the PPM docs and say to me, it's got a lot of these risk factors and all. I always think like, what investments are you looking at that don't have all of those risk factors? Because that would scare me. I always just think it's like kind of funny. It's like they should all have those. And to your point, if you're kind of don't necessarily know what to ask or struggling to find, ask questions to discover more about the deal or the operations or the team or anything like that, starting with those risk factors right there and just asking some questions about how are they mitigated, where could it go down the line and all that kind of stuff. That's a great place to start. And I love what you're saying about, just how does it make money and how does it lose money? It's so simple, yet I think so many, it's just people just go right past it. It's so foundational that you could just be looking right past that. And I love to break things down. I'm just that kind of a guy, where it's like, what's the simplest form, and then kind of start from there. And I think a lot of times I see content like on LinkedIn and different places where people try to make things very complicated, and they get real fancy with all kinds of different metrics and how to look at this and that and all. And at the end of the day, if you know how something makes money, how it loses money, how you're getting your money back and where you're at from there and all that kind of stuff, you're in a pretty good place. That's a good starting point. And then you can kind of take it as far as you want to take it from there, but that's a great place to get started. I'm always curious, you had mentioned a big part of getting into the operational side, leaning more into the real estate and the multifamily was something you wanted to do for retirement, and you kind of realized that the retirement that you wanted wasn't going to happen through traditional means necessarily. How does the multifamily model, though, of like, buying a property, adding value in various ways, and then selling it, 5-7 years down the line or whatever it may be. How does that help with the cash flow play? Are you doing, like, from a long-term cash flow perspective, are you doing something else, or is there something I'm missing? Or, what does that look like?
That's a great question. So I'll go back and tackle the kind of what we were trying to get out of this. We were looking to significantly increase our net worth so that we could basically live off of cash flow. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to go out on a limb and guess you've heard of some guy named Grant Cardone.
Sure.
Mr. 10X.
You haven't heard away from Grant, my God.
Yeah, if you haven't heard of Grant, you're probably living under a rock.
Yeah. I'll give him for any. I don't know what people's opinions are of him, but I'll give him that. My God, he could market like anybody, better than everybody.
Love him or hate him,
you can't get away from him.
As long as you're talking about him, he's happy. And here we are talking about him. But one of his big things, is Mr. 10X, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can guarantee you, the only people at Cardone Capital that are 10X in their money is Grant. Now, his investors might be doubling their money, which is great because that's what we typically aim for, to double our investors' money. But as a general partner, our goal is to, 7 to 10x, our money that we have in the deal. And we do that, by operating the deal. And again, this is one of those things where it goes back to understanding the investment on how, not, you as if you've got an accredited investor, yeah, you need to understand how you're going to get paid, how your money's going to come to you. But it's also a good idea to understand how the sponsors that are running the deal are getting paid. Are they incentivized in some fashion to do really, really well so that you do really, really well? And, we always try to make it, transparent with our investors. We'll typically do an 80-20 split. Depending on what the deal warrants, if it's a very heavy value add, we might do a 75-25 split, just because it's going to be a lot more work for us. And we're going to have to, bring in some people and, split some fees and things. I mean, we still end up making about the same amount of money. It's just that we have to spread it more.
Mm-hmm.
And, and we're always happy to, go over everything with the investors if somebody has a question. Because, we try to be very transparent in what we do. If somebody has a question, if I can't answer it, which happens a lot, then I'll get with one of the other partners that can answer it, and we'll make sure they get their question answered. But, typically we want to build that up. And with the heavy value adds, the cash flow is usually zero on the front end. Like we closed on a deal last February, and we told the investors up front going in before anybody even invested, hey, there will be no cash flow on this deal for the first year, guaranteed. Because, when we took it over, it was 69% occupied.
Wow.
And we spent right at $3 million on it right now. We got another about $300K left to spend on it. We're holding that in reserve because it's a 70s property. There's probably going to be some more plumbing issues that pop up. We've taken care of a lot. I mean, like $600K of it was all plumbing. And, so the cash flow part, I joke with people and say, I suffer the curse of the real estate investor. I look great on a balance sheet, but I have no cash. Because about the time I do collect a pile of cash, it's like, ooh, look over there, shiny deal. And out the door goes my money. Now, my wife and I have consciously made the decision that we're okay living, a cash-constrained lifestyle at the moment, because once we get to the point where we retire her from her W-2 job, then we can travel more. And I don't know if you can see my background here. This is actually from one of our travels. We went down to Antarctica.
Okay, that's what I was thinking it was.
Yeah, the little yellow thing over my shoulder here is a 6-person mini sub.
Oh wow.
We got to go down and check out, all the stuff that lives down there. I was amazed at how much sea life lives down there. But I don't want to get off on topic. Travel's another one of the things I can talk about for days. Real estate, alternate asset investing, travel, those are all my fun things to talk about. But anyway, back to, continuing to answer your question on cash flow. That's one of the reasons we look at some of the other alternate assets like oil and gas. The oil and gas is great for the tax benefits. You got to make sure it's structured properly. That's a whole completely different conversation. That could probably be 2 or 3 podcasts on its own. But triple net lease is great for cash flow. No tax benefits really to speak of.
Sure.
So it's, you got to look at it. I always tell investors, I say, what are you trying to accomplish with your money? What do you want your money to do for you? Younger investors, again, it depends on where they are in life, but most of them, you really want capital accumulation. You want to increase the amount of capital that you have. And if you don't need cash flow because you're both working, great.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on things that grow over time, that are tax advantaged, and that are inflation resistant. I need more coffee. And then we'll just blame it on daylight savings time.
There you go.
Um, but yeah, it's a what is it you as the investor are trying to achieve? I strongly encourage people to write down their goals.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are you trying to accomplish? I mean, you don't have to have, 40 pages of spreadsheets and PERT charts and all this other stuff. I said, just, what do you need to be comfortable? And, what are your investments providing the cash flow you need for that comfort?
Mhm.
And if the answer is no, well, then reevaluate your investments. I know most of us have something that we could give up if we really wanted to, if it was important enough to, I gave up my Starbucks habit for a while
Sure.
because, that, $5 to $10 a day adds up really quick.
Sure.
And if you take that and invest it in something, well, now, it's an opportunity. Now you're creating cash flow, and my cash flow pays for my Starbucks habit.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think you make a really good point about writing goals down. And I talk a lot about this on the show because I think it's one thing that people tend to do in their businesses, and they go to consultants and coaches and things like that. And that's a lot of times a big part of what they tell you to do. And if people work in corporate and stuff like that, most of those companies will definitely have you doing stuff like that. But how many of us do that in our own personal life? And to your point, we're all kind of at different stages of our investing. We have different goals and we have different risk appetites and things like that. And depending on what that is necessarily for you, that should probably be leading you down different paths in the investment space. And a lot of times I'll talk to people and they'll tell me their goals are this and that. And then they'll say, a couple months later, it's like, oh, what are you investing in? That kind of thing. And next thing you know, they want cash flow, but they're investing in a development play or something like that. And it's just like, that it always seems I see that a lot where it seems to be kind of differences between what somebody actually wants goal wise and then what they maybe do. And not that there's anything wrong with that. People could do whatever they want, but I always think that, writing down the goals, getting clear on the kind of the life you want, and zooming, kind of out 5 years, 10 years, where you want to be, and then kind of re-engineering from there to what's going to get you there. And then to your point, like, educating yourself, constantly educating yourself. Because when you first kind of maybe enter this space, chances are you might not know all these other things are out there. I think a lot of people enter this world through single family or through multifamily or through lending or wholesaling or all the kind of basic stuff. But there's a lot, especially if you're going to be an LP, there's a lot of other things you could approach sooner than later, depending on how much you educate yourself, how comfortable you feel, how much capital you're looking to deploy, all that kind of stuff. That could certainly be helping getting you to your goals. And it is just constant education, but writing things down and getting clear on it is going to definitely just help to steer the ship at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it is. I always remind investors that it's a process. As the first investments is almost always the scariest one because it's like, oh crap, I'm doing something new. I'm not investing in Wall Street. There's no guarantees. And if you read the fine print, there's no guarantees in Wall Street either. You've got to go in there. I mean, nobody ever reads all the investment documents in the stocks. If they did, they'd probably never invest.
Sure.
It's kind of like the
PPM. You'd be reading for days.
That's what the PPM is. It's a private placement memorandum. It's a private stock offering. It's just not traded on the stock exchange. It is governed by the SEC. So, there's a lot of rules and things, and there's reporting and stuff that we have to do, but nothing like, an Apple or a Facebook or, whoever that has to, make all of their, financials audited and post the findings publicly.
So what are you doing at Craft versus what you're doing outside of Craft? Because it sounds like you do your own investing, but you also work with other you work on that team as well. So I'm curious to what you do there, and then kind of how these things sit in different partnerships and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, like I say, I'm invested in quite a few LP deals, um, and those are all separate. So we
Okay.
keep our LP investments separate from our active general partner business.
Mm-hmm.
All of my multifamily general partner business, all that work now is being done with Crafts Capital Investments. I started my own company a while back, TWT Multifamily, and then after about 3.5 years, we decided to merge with Crafts Capital because we'd done 2 or 3 deals together, and we're going, okay, we've dated now. We see that we can get along.
Mm-hmm.
We like each other's style. Let's go ahead and formalize this a little more. So Gabe invited me on to be his VP of Treasury and Finance, which is kind of funny because I don't have a finance degree and I can spell Treasury 3 out of 4 times.
What does that mean? It's maybe the first time I've heard that title. I was curious to what exactly that means.
My job is just to keep the money straight,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and make sure that we have money at our properties to take care of all the day-to-day operations. Now, I've got a great team behind me that does most of the hard work. Our property management company has their own CPA and bookkeeping team. And so, but I work with them because we typically keep, we have an operations account for each property, and then we have an owner reserve account for each property. And I like to refer to the owner reserve account as my oh crap fund. So when the property manager calls you and you go, oh crap, you reach into your oh crap fund, you throw some money at it, and it's not a problem anymore. But if your oh crap fund is empty, now you're really going, oh crap.
Yeah, definitely.
So that Gable, when he hears this, he'll start chuckling because he knows I harp on him all the time about, we've got to keep a good reserve in the owner's account. And, our general rule of thumb is we like to keep an extra month and a half of operating expenses in the operating account. We like to keep about 2 months of operating expenses, plus some additional reserves in the owner reserve account. And it's all about risk management, right?
Sure.
The older the property, the bigger that oh crap fund needs to be.
Well, paint the picture on the properties too, just so we can get some, an idea. Is there a typical buy box, from a size and air location and the value to be added and all that kind of stuff? I'm curious.
Yeah, right now, the perfect property for Craft Capital is 200 to 300 units located in the mid-cities area in Dallas-Fort Worth. Kind of like Hurst, Euless, Bedford, Arlington, Grand Prairie, kind of around that area. We know that area really, really well. We visit our properties probably 5 or 6 times more often than anybody else our size, that's 2 or 3 people that manage.
Mm-hmm.
And because we're usually at our property twice a week. We're very hands-on operators. Now, the other thing that I try to do is I try to rein Gabe and our other partner, Misha, in a little bit to go, hey, I know you love getting in there and getting your hands dirty, but make sure you always remind the guys in the office that to follow the chain of command. I Navy guy, so that's a big thing with me. Their direction doesn't need to come from us. Matter of fact, it shouldn't come from us. We give direction to the property management company.
Mm-hmm.
We have a phenomenal regional. She's amazing, and we let her take care of all that. And she knows she can text any one of us day or night. And I'll give you a prime example. We got a text last week during the big windstorm that blew through Texas, and fortunately, none of our properties had any major damage. But we got out there, the next morning and flew a drone over a couple of the properties. And one of the properties, the vent hoods at the top had kind of blown loose a little bit. And so we got our roofer out there within about 4 or 5 hours to get it back up there and get everything nailed back down. And literally within an hour of him finishing, we had this massive downpour.
Wow.
And so just us being very hands-on operators prevented probably $20,000 or $30,000 worth of damage.
Sure.
Water pouring into your house is a bad thing.
Sure. That leads to a lot of bad things.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of, one of the reasons I partnered with them is, Gabe is great. He's very visionary. He's got a lot of great ideas of where he wants to go and grow the company. And I'm just happy that he's invited me along to be part of it. I jokingly tell people my unofficial title is vice president in charge of a few things. I do whatever the team needs done to, get over whatever hump we're trying to get over next.
Sure. In a small business, you have to, right?
Yeah.
They wear a lot of hats.
Yeah. And that's, one of the things that that we talked about briefly earlier was, as a small business, we know people struggle. And, we want to, be able to reach out to small businesses and, help them understand, how to develop streams of income from alternate investments like multifamily real estate, oil and gas, triple net leases. Because it can be overwhelming trying to figure that out and run your business at the same time. So, we're looking to, that's really our avatar is who we're reaching out to is, small business owners that want to maybe build a cushion, because, if your business is doing great, people aren't thinking about it as much. But when your business is starting to struggle, if you had already invested and you've got some income coming in from some other source that maybe, let's say, pays your electric bill, now you don't have to worry about keeping the lights on. You've got a revenue stream that's coming in that helps you pay some of your expenses. And ideally you grow that over time to where it covers all of your expenses and you don't have to work. You get to work.
Yeah.
And because most small business owners, the reason they're doing what they do is they like it. They've got some, whether it's, a love of the business, the love of the handicraft. I've got a friend of mine that I trained with in Kempo Karate. He's an amazing woodworker. And that's what his company does, custom like molding, wood molding and, custom woodwork, for some of these really nice hotels. And, I'm not talking Holiday Inn, I'm talking, like these 5-star hotels that pay him ridiculous amounts of money because he does a ridiculously good job of woodwork.
Yeah. I was in a business club years ago, very active in it. And one of the things I noticed a lot was a lot of small business owners invest all of their money back into the business, and for various reasons, whether because they have to, because they're kind of growing their equity, and their net worth, that kind of thing. But I always thought that was you do need some diversification, right? I mean, I don't think you want to put 100% of everything back into that business. Sometimes you have to, but other times, if you can, like you said, kind of create some alternate streams, and there's a hedge there against inflation and other things as well.
And tax benefits too. If your business is going gangbusters and you're making a lot of money, that's awesome until it gets around to be about April or March 15th.
Sure.
You got to file your business taxes.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. We covered a lot of different things. I think one of the best takeaways was just the simplicity of, what you're investing in. How does it make money? How does it lose money? I think that was gold. And there was a couple nuggets throughout here that was really great, and I think could be really helpful for some people. If people want to learn more about you, what you're doing, and you got some educational stuff coming up and things like that, how can they get in touch with you, and how can they get in your world and on your radar?
Well, thanks for asking, Peter. Our website is Craft, CRAFT, Capital Investments with an S.com. And once you get on the page, you can click on the contact us, and that'll take you to you can book a call with me or Gabe or Misha. And, we're always happy to chat. You did mention we've got some educational stuff coming out. We've got an ebook that's targeted at small business owners. That's going to be free. It's not out yet. Stay tuned. But, reach out if you want to, if you're listening to this and you want to find out where the ebook is, check out our content, contact us page on the website. And, like I say, we're an open book. Love to have a conversation about anything investing, anything small business. If you're an operator, you do multifamily, if you got problems that you're beating your head against, we love to solve problems. That's one of the things we do. We'd be happy to talk to you about that as well.
That's awesome. I always love, people that are open for a phone call. Not everybody nowadays is open for a phone call, and I think a lot gets done through phone calls, and you never know where it's going to go, and where it's going to take you, what you're going to learn, that kind of thing. So that's awesome. Well, Shawn, I really appreciate your time. This has been a great conversation, and thank you for being here today.
Peter, I really appreciate it, and I hope your guests got something useful out of it.